It started with a voice message. Not just any voice message. A misstep. A crack in the polished armor of my seemingly perfect life. I wasn't snooping, wasn't prying. Sarah, my wife, had accidentally left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. The familiar ping caught my attention. I was pouring us both glasses of wine after dinner, the kind of simple evening ritual we'd fallen into over the years. Nothing extraordinary. She was in the next room, laughing at something on TV, her voice ringing out like bells. Carefree, light. Then came the voice. Male. Deep, confident, teasing. Don't forget what you promised me last night. Babe, you owe me. Felt like my ears misfired. A prank? A wrong number? But my hand froze over the counter. The wine bottle tipped slightly, spilling crimson over the white marble. I barely noticed. My chest tightened, instinctively rejecting what my brain was processing. I pressed play again, and again. Each time, the words were the same. The tone, the flirtation, the familiarity. By the time Sarah walked back into the room, I was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles had turned white. "Hey, what's taking so long?" she asked, oblivious. Her eyes flitted to the spilled wine, and she frowned. "Geez, Mike, are you okay? You're usually not this clumsy." She reached for the phone, but I was quicker. I locked it and placed it back on the counter, forcing myself to breathe. "Just tired." I lied. "Long day." She shrugged, picking up her glass like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The kind of thing you can't ignore or excuse. The kind that sits in your gut like a stone, cold and heavy. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Sarah was rushing out the door early, barely throwing a kiss my way. She claimed she was meeting a friend for brunch. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But now, every move she made felt like a puzzle piece sliding into a larger, darker picture. I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. She didn't go to the cafe she mentioned. Instead, her car led me to a gym on the far side of town. I parked across the street, my heart hammering like a drum. Every part of me wanted to convince myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid even. But then, as I sat there watching the entrance, he appeared. Tall, athletic build, confident stride. The kind of guy who probably had a waiting list of admirers. Sarah greeted him in a way that left no room for doubt. Her smile was too bright, her body language too familiar. She leaned in close, brushing her hand against his arm. They didn't walk into the gym. They walked past it, into a small diner nearby. I could have confronted them right then and there, marched in like a scene from some bad soap opera. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed in my car, anger coiling inside me like a spring. This wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding just how far this went. That evening, I decided to play along. When Sarah came home, I acted like everything was normal. I made dinner, cracked jokes, and even asked about her brunch. She lied so smoothly it made my stomach churn. "Oh, it was great," she said, barely looking up from her plate. "Stacy says hi, by the way." Stacy, her best friend from college. Always the convenient alibi. I didn't press. Not yet. Instead, I bided my time, letting her dig herself deeper. If she thought I was blind to the cracks in our life, she was dead wrong. What she didn't know was that I'd already made my decision. Whatever this thing between us had been, it was over. She just didn't know it yet. The morning after I followed Sarah to the diner, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The game had begun, and I was no longer content to sit idly by while Sarah played me for a fool. But first, I needed proof. While Sarah was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down as always. This time, I wasn't interested in messages or voice notes. Those could be easily deleted. Instead, I went straight for her photos. She was meticulous about her phone. Everything perfectly organized. Albums labeled. No clutter. But one album stood out. Work events. It didn't make sense. Sarah's job wasn't the kind that required much traveling or schmoozing. Yet, here was an album filled with pictures of hotel rooms, fancy dinners, and selfies with the same guy I'd seen at the diner. In one photo, they were by a fireplace, drinks in hand, her head resting on his shoulder. The timestamp? The same weekend she told me she was on a girls' retreat with Stacy. My pulse pounded as I scrolled further, my hand trembling. Another picture. This time, Sarah kissing him on the cheek, his smirk directed straight at the camera. Felt like a punch to the gut. I barely had time to lock her phone and place it back before she stepped out of the bathroom. Towel wrapped around her, steam following in her wake. "Morning," she said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You're up early." I nodded, forcing a smile. Couldn't sleep. If she noticed anything off, she didn't show it. That evening, I set the next part of my plan in motion. I didn't want her to suspect anything, so I played the devoted husband to perfection. I cooked her favorite dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and even brought up the trip I'd been planning for months. "I was thinking we could get away for a bit," I said, casually swirling my glass. "Just the two of us. Some time to reconnect." Her reaction was instant. She looked guilty, just for a split second. But then, she laughed it off. "Oh, that sounds amazing," she said. "But I've got a work thing next month. Maybe after that." A work thing. The same excuse she always used. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone even. I wasn't surprised. The trip wasn't real, anyway. It was bait and she'd taken it. Later that night, while Sarah was asleep, I took my plan a step further. I logged into our shared bank account and pulled up her credit card transactions. I didn't need to dig far. Charges for restaurants and hotels I'd never heard of. All under the guise of business expenses. The kicker? A boutique jewelry store receipt dated 3 weeks ago. The same week she told me she was too busy to make it home for dinner. It was all lining up, every detail painting a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. The next day, I took a detour during my lunch break. The jewelry store was small and upscale, the kind of place where the staff knew their customers by name. When I walked in, a young woman behind the counter greeted me warmly. "Welcome. Can I help you find something special?" I slid my phone across the counter, pulling up the charge from Sarah's card. "I'm actually here about this purchase. I'm trying to confirm what it was." Her cheerful expression faltered. Sure. Let me check our records." A minute later, she returned, holding a file. That was for a men's bracelet. Engraved, actually. She hesitated, clearly unsure if she should continue. "Go on," I prompted, my voice tight. "It says the engraving was to D." "D," I repeated, my stomach twisting. She nodded. "That's all I have here. Sorry." I forced a polite smile, thanked her, and walked out, my mind racing. That night, Sarah came home late. She was unusually cheerful, almost glowing. She kissed me on the cheek as she dropped her bag by the door. "Long day?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Exhausting," she replied, sighing dramatically. "Work is killing me lately." I nodded, pretending to sympathize. But in my mind, all I could think about was the bracelet. To D. Who the hell was D? I couldn't get the engraving out of my head. To D. The name was a lead, but it wasn't enough. I needed to find out who D was and how deep this rabbit hole went. Sarah was predictable in some ways, and that was my advantage. She had a habit of leaving her laptop open when she worked at home, trusting that I was too uninterested in her boring reports to snoop. She was wrong. The next evening, after she went to bed, I quietly slipped into the living room where her laptop sat on the coffee table. It wasn't locked, just asleep. I tapped the trackpad, and the screen flickered to life. Her email inbox was clean, too clean. She'd clearly deleted anything incriminating. But I knew there was always something people forget. And there it was, her calendar. She'd marked an appointment for Friday night. The location was a restaurant I'd never heard of, under the vague title Meeting with D. It wasn't just any restaurant either, it was an expensive place, the kind where reservations are booked months in advance. I stared at the entry, my heart racing. This was it. This was where I'd find my answers. Friday came faster than I expected. Sarah claimed she had to work late, kissing me goodbye as she left in her sleek black dress. Hair perfect, lips painted a deep red. "You look incredible," I said, forcing the words out. She gave me a coy smile. "Just trying to impress some clients." As the door clicked shut behind her, I grabbed my jacket and followed. The restaurant was tucked away in the heart of downtown, candlelit and intimate. I parked a block away and walked toward the entrance, keeping a low profile. Through the large windows, I scanned the dining room until I spotted her. There she was, sitting across from him. It was the same man from the diner, the gym. He was laughing, leaning in too close, his hand resting on hers across the table. Sarah's expression was one I hadn't seen in months, soft, adoring, alive. I stood there, frozen, as a wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. But beneath it all was a cold determination. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. This was the time to act. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sarah might have been careless, but I wasn't going to be. Instead of confronting them, I walked away. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. By the time Sarah returned that night, I was waiting in the living room, sitting calmly on the couch. I dimmed the lights, the room bathed in a warm glow. "Hey, you're still up?" she said, her tone casual as she set her purse down. "Yeah," I replied evenly. "I thought we could talk." She froze for a fraction of a second before smiling. "Sure. What's up?" I gestured for her to sit across from me, and she complied, her movements cautious. "How was your meeting?" I asked, my voice steady. "Oh, the usual," she said with a shrug. "Nothing exciting." Her lie was smooth, practiced. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Funny, because I stopped by that restaurant tonight. The one where you were meeting clients." Her face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, the screen glowing with the photos I'd taken. Her and Dee, laughing, holding hands, sharing a dessert. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my tone ice cold. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Mike, it's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like you're on a date with a guy who isn't your husband." She shifted in her seat, her expression flickering between guilt and defiance. "Okay, fine," she snapped. "Yes, I had dinner with him, but it's not a big deal. We're just friends." I scoffed, the sound bitter. Friends don't buy each other engraved bracelets. Friends don't sneak around behind their spouse's back. Her jaw tightened. "You've been spying on me? Don't turn this around on me." I shot back, my voice rising. "You're the one lying. You're the one cheating." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Sarah stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice sharp, cutting. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing him. But maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to." The words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see the pain. "You're unbelievable," I said, standing up. "You think this is my fault? You're the one who destroyed this marriage, Sarah." She stood too, her posture defiant. Maybe this marriage was already broken. I stared at her, searching for the woman I thought I knew, but all I saw was a stranger. "This isn't over," I said quietly, turning toward the door. "Not by a long shot." As I left the room, her voice followed me, mocking and cold. "Good luck figuring out what to do without me, Mike." But she had no idea what I was capable of. By the next morning, I had a plan. Sarah had underestimated me, assuming I'd crumble under her smug indifference and barbed remarks. But she didn't know the version of me that could be meticulous, cold, and calculating. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one. I started by gathering my arsenal. The photos, the bank statements, the receipts, I documented everything. Every lie she told, every instance of betrayal, was now neatly cataloged. This wasn't just about confrontation anymore. It was about leverage. But it wasn't enough to have evidence. I needed her to feel the weight of her actions. That evening, Sarah seemed unfazed, as if our confrontation the night before had been a minor inconvenience rather than a bombshell. She hummed to herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like the perfect wife, while I sat at the dining table silently watching. "You're awfully quiet," she said without turning around. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked, her tone light, dismissive. "About us," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And how we got here." She paused for a moment but didn't turn around. "Oh, come on, Mike. Are you really still upset about last night? I told you, It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. Not as bad, I repeated, letting out a dry laugh. Sarah, you're having an affair. I think that qualifies as bad. She slammed the knife down, spinning to face me. Fine. Yes, I'm seeing someone else. But honestly, can you blame me? Her words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Blame you? I said, standing up slowly. You're the one who turned our marriage into a joke. Oh, spare me the pity act, she snapped, crossing her arms. You've been boring for years, Mike. Predictable. Safe. I needed something more. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. Well, if more means sneaking around like a coward, I guess you found exactly what you were looking for, I said, my voice cold. She rolled her eyes, waving her hand dismissively. You wouldn't understand. You're right, I said, walking toward her. I don't understand, but I will. She frowned, confused. What's that supposed to mean? You'll see, I said, my tone calm but laced with menace. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I acted subdued, almost defeated, letting her believe she'd won. She seemed to relish it, her arrogance growing with each passing day. But behind the scenes, I was putting my plan into motion. The first step was to involve Stacy. She wasn't just Sarah's best friend. She was also the weak link. Stacy had always been talkative, especially after a drink or two, and I knew exactly how to use that to my advantage. I invited Stacy over under the guise of needing advice. She arrived, intrigued and perhaps a little too eager to hear about the drama. I don't know what to do, I said, pouring her another glass of wine. Sarah says she's not happy, but she won't tell me why. I just want to fix things. Stacy hesitated, the wine loosening her inhibitions. Mike, she stopped, biting her lip. What? I pressed, leaning forward. It's not my place to say, she said, glancing at the floor. Please, I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound vulnerable. I just want the truth. She sighed, then looked me in the eye. Sarah's been seeing someone else. I thought you knew. My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral. Who? His name's Derek, she admitted reluctantly. They've been involved for a while now. Derek, D. The pieces were falling into place. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice heavy with feigned disappointment. I thought it wasn't my business, she said, guilt creeping into her tone. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. Thanks for telling me now, I said, standing and walking to the kitchen to collect myself. When Stacy left, I had everything I needed. The final step of my plan was simple. Confront Sarah in a way she couldn't deny or twist. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I reached out to Derek. Finding him wasn't difficult. Sarah's photos and receipts had given me more than enough clues. I posed as a client looking for fitness training, booking a session at the gym where he worked. When I arrived, he greeted me with a smile, clearly unaware of who I was. Derek, right? I said, shaking his hand. Yeah, that's me, he said confidently. I leaned in, my grip tightening. I'm Mike, Sarah's husband. His smile faltered, his face paling. Let's talk, I said, leading him to a quiet corner. By the time I left the gym, I'd laid my trap. Derek, rattled and cornered, had agreed to meet Sarah the next evening at our house. I assured him I wasn't interested in revenge, only closure. He bought it, but Sarah wouldn't know he was coming. Not yet. I set the stage, my evidence spread out on the coffee table like a court exhibit. When Derek walked through the door, Sarah would have no choice but to face the truth in its entirety. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. The next evening arrived with a heaviness in the air. Sarah was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed, completely oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I deliberately set the time for Derek's arrival when Sarah would be most relaxed, her guard down. She had poured herself a glass of wine and was wearing the oversized sweater she always wore at home, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't wait to shatter that illusion. Hey, she called out as I walked into the room, her tone casual. What's for dinner? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the window and glanced at the driveway. Right on time. A car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the evening gloom. Sarah didn't notice at first, but when the knock at the door echoed through the house, her head jerked up. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked, frowning. "You could say that," I replied, my voice calm. Before she could press further, I walked to the door and opened it. There he was, Derek, looking awkward and unsure, like a deer caught in headlights. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. The sound of Derek's voice saying, thanks," made Sarah's wine glass slip from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color as Derek stepped into the living room. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, defensive. "This," I said, gesturing between them, "is the end of the charade." Derek looked between us, clearly regretting his decision to come. "Mike, I thought you said—" "I said I wanted closure," I interrupted, turning to Sarah. "And that's exactly what we're all going to get tonight." She stood abruptly, her body tense like a coiled spring. "Mike, you're being ridiculous. Derek doesn't need to be here. This is between us." "Don't worry, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. "He won't be here long. But I figured it was only fair to let him see what you've been hiding." I gestured to the coffee table, where I had laid out the photos, the bank statements, and the receipts. Every lie, every betrayal was there in black and white. "What the hell is this?" Sarah hissed, her voice rising. "This," I said, my voice cutting through her protests, "is proof that I'm not as stupid as you think I am." Her eyes darted to Derek, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. "You told him?" she snapped, her tone accusatory. "Not exactly," I said. "He just happened to be part of the puzzle." Derek raised his hands defensively. "Look, I didn't know it was going to turn into this. I thought you were getting a divorce or something." Sarah shot him a venomous look. "You thought? You're unbelievable." "Unbelievable," I echoed, laughing bitterly. "You've got some nerve, Sarah. You lied to me, snuck around, and now you're trying to blame him." She turned to me, her expression hardening. "Oh, don't play the victim, Mike. You've been a checked-out, boring husband for years. I deserved better." I stepped closer, my anger boiling over. "If you wanted out, you could have said something. You didn't have to turn our marriage into a goddamn joke." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension so thick it felt like it could snap at any second. Then Sarah smirked, her lips curling into something cruel and cold. "You think you've won, don't you? Sitting there, playing detective, trying to catch me in the act. But guess what, Mike? You're still pathetic. All of this, it doesn't change a damn thing." Her words cut deeper than I expected, but I refused to let her see it. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "It doesn't change what you've done, but it does change what happens next." She raised an eyebrow, trying to look unimpressed. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" I turned to Derek, who looked like he was trying to make himself invisible. "You can go now. You're not the problem here anymore." Derek didn't need to be told twice. He muttered a quick, "Sorry, man," and bolted for the door. As the door clicked shut, I faced Sarah, who was now glaring at me like a cornered animal. "This is how it ends, Sarah," I said. "You alone, with no one left to lie to." Her smirk faltered for the first time, her confidence cracking. "What are you saying?" "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "Done being your doormat, your excuse, your cover story. You've burned every bridge we had, and now you get to live with the ashes." I walked toward the door, leaving her standing there amidst the evidence of her betrayal. As I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time. "You always said you deserved better, Sarah," I said. "I hope you find it, but it won't be me." And with that, I walked out, leaving her to confront the ruins of the life she had so casually destroyed. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the boiling chaos I just left behind. My heart was pounding, my breath sharp and shallow, but I didn't stop walking. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt free. Behind me, the house stood like a monument to everything that had gone wrong. I imagined Sarah inside, fuming, pacing, or maybe even crying, but I didn't care. Not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sarah wasn't the type to let anyone else have the last word. But I wasn't ready to deal with her, not yet. I needed to think. to breathe, to figure out what came next. The first call I made was to my best friend, Ryan. We hadn't talked much in the past year. Sarah always found a way to monopolize my time or guilt me into staying home when I tried to reconnect with people. But now I needed him. Mike, Ryan answered, his voice groggy. It's me, I said, my throat tight. Can you talk? Yeah, man. What's going on? I hesitated, the weight of everything threatening to crush me. But then, like a dam breaking, it all came pouring out. The affair, the lies, the confrontation. Holy crap, Ryan said when I finished. I knew she was trouble, but I didn't think she'd stoop that low. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, I didn't think I'd be the idiot who didn't see it coming. You're not an idiot, he said firmly. You trusted her. That's not a weakness. It's what a husband's supposed to do. She's the one who blew it, not you. We talked for hours, the conversation drifting between anger, regret, and cautious plans for the future. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd finally started to untangle myself from the wreckage Sarah had left behind. The next few days were surreal. Sarah called constantly at first, her messages swinging wildly between anger, guilt, and attempts to manipulate me. You're overreacting, Mike. We can fix this. I don't even care about Derek. It was just a fling. You're throwing everything away over one mistake? You're pathetic. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on myself. I started packing a bag, sorting through what I wanted to take and what I was ready to leave behind. The house was ours legally, but I didn't care about fighting for it. Let her have the damn place, it was tainted now anyway. I spent one final night there, alone, sitting on the couch with a drink in hand. The silence was deafening, but it was better than the constant tension that had filled the house for months. The next morning, I took the final step. I called a lawyer. The meeting was quick and professional. I laid out the situation, handed over the evidence, and listened as they explained my options. Divorce wasn't going to be easy. It never is, but I was ready. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. You didn't come home last night, she said, her tone accusatory. I ignored her, brushing past to grab my packed bag from the bedroom. Mike, seriously, you're not even going to talk to me? There's nothing left to say, Sarah? I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. Her face twisted, a mix of anger and desperation. So that's it? You're just walking out? Yes, I said simply. Because unlike you, I know when to leave something that's broken beyond repair. She followed me to the door, her voice rising. You're such a coward, running away because you can't handle the truth. I stopped, turning to face her one last time. No, Sarah, I'm walking away because I've finally seen the truth. And I'm done pretending that this, I gestured between us, is anything worth saving. Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might try to stop me. But she didn't. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists, watching as I walked out the door. I didn't look back. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be hard days ahead. But as I drove away from the house, leaving Sarah and all her lies behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I didn't expect Sarah to go quietly. The first sign came 2 days after I moved out. My phone buzzed with a notification, a long, scathing message from Sarah. But this wasn't the usual mix of insults and half-baked apologies. No, this was different. You think you're so smart, don't you? Running off and leaving me to deal with everything. Well, guess what, Mike? People are going to know the truth. You've always been the problem, not me. I'm not the bad guy here, and I won't let you make me out to be. I stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion washing over me. She wasn't done manipulating. If she couldn't win me back, she was determined to ruin my reputation instead. That afternoon, the calls started coming in. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Mike, what's going on? One of my old college buddies asked. Sarah's been posting all over social media about how you abandoned her. She's saying you had some kind of breakdown. Breakdown, right? I logged into Facebook for the first time in weeks and was greeted by a flood of posts from Sarah. Carefully curated photos of her looking sad and reflective, paired with captions like, I gave him everything and he just walked away. Some people don't value what they have until it's gone. And the comments? A stream of sympathetic responses. People calling me selfish, cold, ungrateful. Her narrative was working. I knew I had two choices: defend myself publicly or let her dig her own grave. After some deliberation, I chose the latter. Sarah had always been obsessed with controlling how people saw her, but the truth had a way of seeping through the cracks. All I had to do was wait. Meanwhile, the divorce process began to move forward. The lawyer I'd hired, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen, was sharp, thorough, and refreshingly direct. "She's going to try to play the victim," Ellen said during one of our meetings. "Women like her always do, but you've got the evidence, and as long as you stay calm and stick to the facts, we'll get through this." I nodded, feeling a flicker of relief. Someone was finally on my side. Then, about a week later, I got a text from Stacy. "Hey, can we talk? It's important." I debated ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Stacy looked nervous, fidgeting with her cup as she sat across from me. "Mike, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she began. "For what?" I asked, folding my arms. "For not telling you sooner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Derek, about everything. I knew it wasn't right, but Sarah's my best friend. I didn't want to get in the middle of it." "And now?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Stacy sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Now she's lost it. She's telling everyone that you cheated on her, that you're unstable. It's not true, obviously, but she's doubling down. I thought you should know." I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and gratitude. "Thanks for telling me. Anything else?" She hesitated, then leaned forward. "Mike, I think she's still seeing Derek, but he's freaking out. He doesn't want to be dragged into all this drama. If you talk to him, you might be able to get him on your side." I raised an eyebrow. "You think he'd turn on her?" Stacy shrugged. "I think he's scared enough to do whatever it takes to save his own skin." That night, I made the call. Derek answered on the second ring. Hey," he said, his voice wary. "Relax. I'm not calling to start a fight," I said. "I just want to talk." There was a long pause. "About what?" "Sarah," I said bluntly, "and how she's dragging both of us through the mud." He sighed. "Look, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know she was married at first. And when I found out, you kept seeing her anyway. I finished for him. I know, okay? I messed up, but I didn't sign up for this circus." "Then help me end it," I said. "If she wants to play games, let's make sure she doesn't win." Derek hesitated, but eventually he agreed. The next morning, I filed an official statement with my lawyer, outlining everything: the affair, the social media smears, and Derek's involvement. I included screenshots of his text messages admitting to the relationship and his willingness to testify if needed. Sarah's perfect narrative was starting to crumble, and I could see the cracks forming. The fallout from Derek's cooperation hit like a wrecking ball. Once my lawyer filed his statement, everything began unraveling for Sarah. She'd spun her web of lies so tightly that when one thread was pulled, the entire thing fell apart. Ellen, my lawyer, called me a few days later, her voice calm but tinged with satisfaction. "We've got her cornered," she said. "Derek's testimony is solid. Combined with the evidence you've provided, it's clear who's been lying. This is going to tip the divorce in your favor." I couldn't help but smile, the weight on my chest lifting slightly. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Sarah wasn't the type to go down quietly. That evening, the storm finally broke. Started with a phone call. I was sitting in my new apartment, a small but cozy space I'd rented downtown, the kind of place that felt like a fresh start. When my phone rang, I saw Sarah's name on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't start with pleasantries. "You've ruined my life," she hissed. I leaned back in my chair, my grip on the phone tightening. "Ruined your life? That's rich, coming from you. You're turning everyone against me," she snapped. "Do you know how many people have called me today, asking about Derek? You're making me look like a fool." "You did that all on your own," I said coldly. Her voice cracked, a mix of anger and desperation. "Do you really hate me that much, Mike?" After everything we've been through, I let out a bitter laugh. After everything we've been through? You cheated, Sarah. You lied to me, to everyone. And now you're mad because people are finding out. There was a long pause, the silence heavy. When she spoke again, her tone was softer, almost pleading. Mike, we can fix this, she said. We don't have to let it end like this. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath. Sarah, it's already over. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't want to admit it. Her voice hardened again, the facade of remorse slipping. Fine. You want to play dirty? Two can play that game. I hung up before she could say anything else. True to her word, Sarah didn't hold back. The next day, she posted a scathing update on social media, accusing me of manipulating Derek and orchestrating a smear campaign. But this time, it didn't have the effect she hoped for. Derek, likely fed up with being dragged into her mess, posted his own statement online. It was brief but damning. I want to clarify that my relationship with Sarah was a mistake. I was unaware of her marital status initially, and I regret my involvement. Mike is not to blame for any of this, and I support his decision to end their marriage. The comments section exploded. People who had previously defended Sarah began turning on her, questioning her motives and calling her out for her lies. By the end of the week, Sarah's carefully crafted image was in shambles. I started hearing from mutual friends who'd once taken her side. They called to apologize, to tell me they had no idea what she was really like. Some even offered to testify on my behalf in the divorce proceedings. One message stood out, though. It was from Stacy. She's furious. Be careful, Mike. She's not done with you yet. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Sarah had always been relentless when she felt cornered. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a text or a call. It was an alert from my bank. My heart sank as I opened the app and saw the charge. Thousands of dollars transferred from our joint account to an unknown recipient. The next morning, I called Ellen, my lawyer, and told her what happened. She was calm but firm. We'll handle it, she assured me. It's illegal for her to touch shared funds during an active divorce. This will only hurt her case. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about Sarah's desperation. She was spiraling, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she did something even more reckless. 2 days later, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Ellen called me, her tone triumphant. The judge has approved an emergency motion. Sarah is officially restricted from accessing any shared assets, and Derek's testimony has been entered into the record. You're in a strong position, Mike. I thanked her, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in weeks. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Sarah was still out there, still fuming, still plotting. And while the legal battle might have been tilting in my favor, I wasn't sure what her next move would be. I just knew it wouldn't be pretty. It didn't take long for Sarah to make her next move. I woke up to a barrage of messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. College friends, co-workers, even my mother. Each one carried the same shocked tone, asking if I'd seen Sarah's latest stunt. I opened my phone to find a post she'd made, plastered across every social media platform. A long, dramatic essay where she painted herself as the tragic heroine and me as a cruel, manipulative villain. When someone you love turns on you, it breaks something inside you. I tried to save our marriage, but Mike refused. He's been spreading lies, dragging my name through the mud, and now he's trying to take everything from me. I just want peace. Attached to the post were photos, carefully cropped and edited moments from our life together. Us laughing at a dinner party, a vacation selfie from years ago, smiling, holding hands. She framed her narrative perfectly, like a courtroom exhibit designed to sway public opinion. The comments were a mix of outrage and skepticism. Some people bought into her sob story. Stay strong, Sarah. You deserve better than him. Mike sounds like a narcissist. You're better off without him. But others were sharper, more critical. Didn't you have an affair? Maybe focus on taking accountability instead of playing the victim. We've seen Derek's statement, Sarah. You're not fooling anyone. I didn't respond. Ellen had warned me about this exact scenario. She wants you to react, she'd said. The best thing you can do is stay quiet and let her burn herself out. But staying quiet wasn't easy. Sarah's post spread like wildfire, reaching people in our shared social circles and beyond. For every person who saw through her lies, there were two who didn't, and the rumors began to spiral. It wasn't just my reputation at stake anymore. It was my career, my friendships, everything I'd spent years building. That night, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through the chaos, my phone buzzed. It was Stacy again. "She's not stopping, Mike. She's telling people you were abusive, that you controlled her." I stared at the message, my hands trembling with rage. I'd never laid a hand on Sarah, never raised my voice in anger until the night of the confrontation. And now she was weaponizing something so vile, so damaging, to protect her own crumbling facade. The next morning I called Ellen. "This has to stop," I said, my voice shaking. "She's digging her own grave," Ellen replied calmly. "The more she lies, the easier it is for us to prove she's unreliable. But this isn't just about the divorce anymore," I said. "She's trying to ruin my life." Ellen was silent for a moment. "There's another option," she said finally. "We can file for a restraining order. It won't stop her from posting, but it will send a message that we're taking this seriously. And if she violates the terms, she'll face legal consequences." "Do it," I said without hesitation. The restraining order was filed the next day, and within hours, Sarah was served. I braced myself for her reaction, knowing it wouldn't be pretty. And I was right. That evening, my phone rang. It wasn't Sarah, it was her mother. "Mike, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The affair, the lies, the smear campaign. Her mother listened in silence, and when I finished, she let out a heavy sigh. I knew she was being reckless, but this, she said, her tone weary. "I don't know what's gotten into her, Mike. She's always had a temper, but this is something else. She's trying to destroy me," I said bluntly. Her mother didn't argue. "I'll talk to her," she said, "but don't expect miracles." The next day, the tide began to turn. Word of the restraining order spread quickly, and it cast a long shadow over Sarah's narrative. People started questioning her motives, wondering why she'd gone to such extremes. Then Derek chimed in again. In a live video posted to his social media, he addressed Sarah directly, his frustration boiling over. "Enough is enough," he said, his tone sharp. "You lied to me, you lied to Mike, and now you're lying to everyone else. Stop dragging us down with you." The backlash was immediate. People who'd once defended Sarah began turning on her in droves, their comments scathing. "So Derek and Mike are both lying?" "Sure, January. This is pathetic. Own up to your mistakes, Sarah." By the end of the week, Sarah had gone silent. Her posts stopped. Her friends stopped defending her. Even Stacy messaged me, saying Sarah had cut her off entirely. "She's isolating herself," Stacy wrote. "I think she's finally realizing she's lost." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. But I knew this wasn't the final chapter. Sarah might have retreated, but she wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. There was still one final confrontation ahead. It happened on a rainy Wednesday evening, weeks after Sarah had gone silent. The divorce proceedings were well underway. The restraining order had worked to keep her at bay, and the smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. For the first time in months, I was beginning to feel like myself again. Then she showed up. I was sitting in my apartment, the soft hum of the television in the background. When the knock came, it was sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, drenched from the rain. Her hair was plastered to her face, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. She didn't look like the confident, composed woman I'd known. She looked desperate. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "I just need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Mike, 5 minutes." Every instinct told me to close the door, to walk away, but something in her eyes stopped me. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the floor, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Say what you need to say," I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room as if searching for an escape route. Then, she let out a shaky breath and looked me in the eye. "I messed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I did, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to go this far. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Sarah, you torched our marriage, dragged my name through the mud, and tried to destroy me. What exactly did you mean to happen? Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. I was angry, okay? I was scared. When you started pulling away, I felt like I was losing control, and I made bad choices. Bad choices, I repeated, my voice rising. You call cheating and lying for months a bad choice? That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's a pattern. A decision you made over and over again. She flinched but didn't look away. I didn't know how to fix it, she said, her voice cracking. And when you started fighting back, I panicked. I thought if I could control the narrative, maybe I could salvage something. But I was wrong. I see that now. Too little, too late, I said coldly. Her tears spilled over, and she took a shaky step toward me. Mike, I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you. I took a step back, keeping the distance between us. You already did, Sarah. The moment you decided to betray me, you lost me. This isn't something you can fix with an apology. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside pounded against the windows, filling the silence between us. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I guess I deserve that, she said softly. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she paused, glancing back at me. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely audible. I did love you, Mike. I don't know how to be the person you deserved. I stared at her, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Goodbye, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment longer, then opened the door and disappeared into the rain. The next day, I filed the final paperwork for the divorce. Sarah didn't contest it, and within weeks, the process was complete. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and even started seeing a therapist to process everything I'd been through. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and betrayal felt like too much to carry. But with time, the wounds began to heal. If there's one thing I learned from this nightmare, it's that love isn't enough. Trust, respect, and honesty are the foundation of any relationship, and without them, love can't survive. As for Sarah, I haven't heard from her since that night. I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and honestly, I don't care. All I know is that I'm free, and that's enough.